I'm Wayne Pacelle, and I've been privileged to serve as President and CEO of the Humane Society of the United States, headquartered in Washington, D.C. for the last 11 years. And I've been with the organization for the last 21 years. I used to be the Chief Political and Communications person. And my colleague Josh Balk is here. He helps run our Farm Animal Protection Department. And he also has created a company in this area, a food company called Hampton Creek, which is the fastest growing food company ever in terms of its sales and certainly its impact on a sector of industry. That company is producing a plant-based alternative to eggs. And the product is already in tens of thousands of stores. It's being picked up by the biggest food companies. And Josh just did that on his side time with HSUS. So what I wanted to do today is give you a little bit of a picture of what the animal protection cause is about, but also to talk to you about some of the themes of the upcoming book that I'm working on. It'll be out in March, called The Humane Economy, where essentially I'm arguing that we're in a revolutionary moment in terms of our human relationship with animals, and that part of the driving activity is entrepreneurialism and innovation, making many forms of traditional animal exploitation obsolete, and that we're going to have new options and opportunities that are going to require no sacrifice for us, but that are going to upend many conventional uses of animals. So the opening slide here, of course, is kind of the archetypal example of what I think of as the humane economy, which is whale watching. The United States used to be the greatest whaling nation in the world, greatest not in terms of best, but greatest in terms of largest. And ships would leave the ports and mainly the East Coast, Nantucket and New Bedford, and ply the world's oceans and kill fin whales and right whales and humpback whales and exploit them for their oil and their blubber. But of course, then there was a huge innovation in terms of petroleum, which made whale oil obsolete. Our values began to progress. We used to think of whales as just these things. We began to recognize they're the largest creatures who've ever lived on the planet, and maybe we should start to protect them. So we as a nation went from this incredible industry where mansions and big buildings were built around the whaling economy, and now the whaling ships are just in museums. If you go to Nantucket, you can go to the whaling museum, but you won't see any U.S. whalers in operation. And I think that is an indicator of what's going to happen in so many other sectors of the animal use economy. So just a quick word about the Humane Society of the United States. We're one of 25,000 animal protection organizations in the United States. We're the largest of them, but there are local humane societies, there are SPCAs, there are 13 or 14,000 animal rescue groups, whether they're doing feral cats or they're doing dog rescue by breed. There may be St. Bernard rescue or Chihuahua rescue. There are hundreds of wildlife rehabilitation facilities all around the United States. Then there are groups that focus on farm animals. There are groups just devoted to that, or animals in entertainment, or there are groups to protect black bears or mountain lions. There's this incredible pluralism that exists when it comes to our relationship with animals. It's reflected in so many different organizations, which collectively are really in the marrow of our culture now. There is just no question that animal protection sensibilities are part of our American ethos and increasingly the global ethos in terms of the human relationship to animals and nature. But anyway, so we do protect all animals, which was the reason for this slide, that we're not just about dogs, we're not just about cats, we're not just about horses, we're about all creatures. They all matter in this world, and we want to be their advocates. We've been around for a little more than 60 years, and this is the chair of the board starting the organization. And the Humane Movement really got its start in the period right after the Civil War. So after the United States dealt with this great moral problem of slavery, people began to think about our responsibilities to animals. And most social movements are born out of crisis. There's a terrible circumstance that warrants people of conscience to rise up and do something. And the environmental movement really began in the 1860s with this hyper-exploitation of nature as we were conducting our westward expansion in the United States. And we were liquidating the buffalo and the elk and the wolves and all of the other creatures. And there are some people who said, no, we've got to place limits on this. And George Perkins Marsh wrote a book called Man and Nature in 1862, and you saw the beginning of a conservation ethic, which a couple of decades later was really typified by Theodore Roosevelt. But around the same time, we also saw the Humane Movement organizing, and the biggest form of abuse was the abuse of horses in cities. We were this agrarian economy, but we began to see new immigrant communities, and we began to aggregate ourselves in these bustling cities of Philadelphia and New York and other cities, and people were using horses for transportation. And people were overworking horses, they were beating horses, they were overloading horses. And Henry Bergh, for one, in New York, a New York socialite, said, we've got to stop it. And he formed the ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And then in the late 1860s and 1870s, there were similar groups created in different communities all around the United States. So the Humane Society of the United States came many years later. It actually spun off from another organization. And the chairman of the board said, driving us to organize was the feeling that the American humane movement needed a national society that would stand absolutely on humane moral principles. An organization that would unequivocally, vigorously, adamantly oppose any and every kind of cruelty, no matter by whom committed, and without concern for who might be offended or alienated. The notion was that there were lots of local groups that were doing critically important work in their communities, most of it rescue, but who was going to address the root causes of cruelty? Rescuing, while vital because animals are in crisis, inevitably addresses the symptoms of a problem. What is the cause or the impetus for the exploitation in the first place? If you're just rescuing the victims after they're injured, in some ways you're late, and you're also not getting at why the circumstance exists that's producing this terrible condition for animals. So one of the big precepts that we operate with is you cannot rescue your way out of the crisis for animals. Think about our world and how many animals there are. We've got 171 million dogs and cats in our homes. There are anywhere from 10 to 100 million feral cats roaming outside in the United States. In the US, we raise 9 billion animals a year for food, 70 billion worldwide. The 7 billion people on the planet, for every one of them, there are 10 farm animals. There are billions of wild animals, countless billions of wild animals of hundreds of species. I think there are 8,000 species of birds. There are thousands of mammal species. And then when you go to other categories or classifications of animals, there are thousands more of them. Animals are used in entertainment, they're used in science, they're used in wildlife management, they're used in food and agriculture. They're used in so many different domains. If we were really good and spent our resources very effectively, maybe we could rescue 500 or 600 or 700,000 animals in a year. But by working to change the way institutions operate and getting animals out of circumstances where alternatives now exist or making things more humane, we can affect the lives of billions of animals. So we at the Humane Society of the United States, more than any other organization, take a highly strategic approach to how we confront this human relationship with animals. And at base level, it's not so much that we talk about animal rights. It's a common term that people use, animal rights. A lot of people debate, do the animals have natural rights? Do we confer them upon animals? We kind of sidestep that entire question because really it's about us. It's not so much about the animals. I mean, yes, we have to understand that animals are conscious, they're thinking, they have feelings, they have families, They value their lives as much as we value our lives. But it's we who are doing these things to these animals. It's more about us than it is about them. So rather than talk about animal rights, we talk about human responsibility. How do we handle the immense power that we have over other creatures? You know, we hear of this term asymmetry in defense and international relations, that the United States has an asymmetrical relationship to other countries because we have all this power. Well, we have an asymmetrical relationship with animals. We hold all the cards. They are at our mercy. We can do anything we want to them because we are so much more powerful than we are. Think back to that period when we were liquidating these wildlife species in the 1860s. 150 years ago, we had that power. There were 40 to 60 million buffalo that were roaming the midsection of the North American continent. We dropped their numbers to 500 in the span of about 3 decades. We wiped out billions of passenger pigeons in the span of 40 years. The last one died in captivity in 1914. So even then, a century ago, we had the power to liquidate entire species, wipe them from the planet. Imagine now what we can do with our technology. So it's really about who we are. So these are the 4 areas in which we work. We do rescue and direct care because, as I said, animals are in crisis. We've got a whole range of programs where we come to the aid of animals. Second is we do public awareness and education because so many people care about animals, but they don't know what problems afflict them. We need to educate people about what's going on and also to provide solutions so people of conscience can act. We also try to shape the laws because laws are designed in a civil society to maintain order, but they're also designed to reflect our values. They're the rules of the road for a civil society. And when it comes to animals, we need standards. A tiny percentage of people in a society of 320 million people can create a lot of havoc. Look at Michael Vick and dogfighting, or other people involved in dogfighting. You could have just 10,000 people involved in an enterprise like dogfighting and victimize hundreds of thousands of dogs. So we must have rules to set a baseline standard that folks can't violate. And it's not just a matter of our personal preference. There are lives at stake. You're shielding vulnerable creatures from cruelty and abuse, which is a core value in our society. And finally, and I think this is really the theme of what I wanted to talk about today, is our corporate reform work. Obviously, Google and the many companies that are associated with Google have been part of this incredible information and technology revolution in the last 20 years, the last quarter century. I mean, it's reshaped our entire economy. That's what we need for animals. That's what we're trying to drive. And you're going to see today how so many companies are really at the leading edge of a revolution in our human relationship to animals and nature. But those are the 4 legs of the table on which all of the activities of the Humane Society of the United States and its affiliates stand. And again, you know, one of the great things about our work at the Humane Society is we don't have to invent a social concern for animals. You know, the book that you may have passed by and walking in here, I wrote a book called The Bond, where I argue that we humans have an instinctive relationship to other creatures. Kids, you see it. I mean, when you were all kids at one point, I imagine, right? Kids have this connection to other creatures. I mean, it's manifest by kids being fascinated by animals on TV. They have animals as toys. 90% of the images in kids' books are animals. There are so many different expressions of this, which I'll talk about in a moment, but people love animals. If we start with that, we have a head start in the fight to help animals. And we're now spending more than $60 billion a year on our dogs and cats, 171 million dogs and cats in our homes. You can get all sorts of things. You know, there are spa treatments for animals now, and there's organic food, and there's so many different expressions of this love and appreciation, and most people consider them part of the family. We also love to see wildlife. We have a whole network of national parks, national forests, Bureau of Land Management lands. We've got state parks, we've got city parks, even in the kind of greatest expression of human civilization and physical and architectural development, like New York City, right in the middle of the city is a park. The planners designed it that way because we're connected to nature. Even when we have tall skyscrapers, we still want to be around nature. We're the first country in the world to have created a national park, 1872 Yellowstone, and now it's been emulated throughout the world. There's a network of national parks all throughout the world because it's a tonic to our soul. We need to be in nature. It's part of who we are because for 99% of human history, we were living in pre-agricultural settings. We were tribal societies. The tribal societies had an intimate knowledge of the animals in the forest. They knew when they bred, they knew what they were like, they knew the floral kingdom as well. Nature is built into every one of us. And I argue in my book that it really is a sort of biophilia, a love of nature that's built into each one of us. And it's manifest with all the wildlife watching that goes on as well. But you know, it's broader than that. We have 2/3 of American households, as I mentioned, have a pet. 91% of people consider their pets to be members of the family. 95% of us agree it's important to me that farm animals are well cared for because the way that we interact with animals more than any other is on our plates. The average American eats 31 animals a year. So think of 320 million people times 30 or 31, that's 9 billion animals. That's how you get that total. Most of them are chickens because they're small. If we ate just beef, it'd be a far smaller number of animals because they're larger and they'd go farther. But you eat a piece of a chicken, it's like 1/3 of a chicken. And that accounts for this enormous number of animals used for food production in our society. But even with that, people want to see those animals more humanely treated than they are. As I mentioned, lots of people watch wildlife. This is an interesting chart. In 1985, just a few years before I got to the Humane Society, this was what the legal situation looked like with 3 types of animal cruelty. States that had felony level penalties for dogfighting and anti-dogfighting laws in general. States had anti-cockfighting laws with felony level penalties. And then states that had a general animal cruelty statute where malicious cruelty was treated as a felony. You can see that just a small number of states had these statutes in 1985. I mean, really a patchwork. About 10, 12 states with felony level penalties for dogfighting, smaller number with cockfighting, and a very small number with felony cruelty. We said at the Humane Society, this can't stand. I mean, if we're going to advocate for animals, there must be a baseline standard with cruelty. So we have methodically gone state by state, and now this is what the map looks like. We have filled out the map. This notion that animal cruelty is wrong is now universal. It's now treated as a serious crime to be malicious and to be cruel toward an animal. You can go to jail, you can be fined. And really, one of the things that we're doing at the Humane Society of the US is saying, okay, if animal cruelty is wrong, if this is a moral problem, how do we logically apply anti-cruelty principles in a world where animals are embedded in so many different aspects of our life and in the economy? They're used for food, they're used in science, wildlife are all around us, they're used in the pet trade, they're used in entertainment. If this notion is meaningful and it's sticky, we've got to more logically apply the principle. So that's really what we're engaging in at the organization. And this really leads to this notion of a disconnect. We say that we love animals. We have all that pet keeping and wildlife watching. We have anti-cruelty laws. Most people, just about every decent person is not going to say it's okay to be cruel to an animal. Yet we live in a world where there's so much exploitation. I mean, we have this tangled, contradictory, even schizophrenic relationship with animals. And that's the cultural and economic climate in which we're operating right now as we do our work at the Humane Society. Think of pets. We love our pets, yet we have 10,000 puppy mills in the United States, churning out dogs for the pet trade, keeping the mother dogs in cages and confinement, exposing them to extremes of heat and cold, denying them vet care, not providing proper socialization, at a time when we're struggling with the local humane societies, SPCAs, and county and municipal animal care and control facilities to adopt out animals and stop euthanasia. We're still euthanizing 3 million healthy dogs and cats every year in the US. This is an image of a puppy mill. Many of these puppy mill operators used to be involved in agriculture. They were pig farmers who got out of the business and started raising dogs, and they adopt many of the same strategies in raising them. They're kind of a production unit. But there's a change happening. And PetSmart and Petco, as two big pet supply chains, in the mid-1990s said, we're not going to continue selling dogs from pet stores, from puppy mills at our pet stores. We're now going to partner with rescue groups and shelters and make dogs and cats available at our facilities. And since that time, more than 10 million dogs and cats have been adopted out through PetSmart and Petco outlets. This is part of this new humane economy. In fact, in 2014, the largest private equity deal in the world was PetSmart being purchased for more than $7 billion by a London-based private equity firm. So the biggest global private equity deal was a pet store company. Quite an amazing change in the world. There are other problems for dogs in the world, and 20 million slaughtered in Asia for human consumption. We've been working to stop this. We're working with Chinese advocates to stop this on the ground in that country. The images are horrifying. If you go to our website, we've got a whole video channel. Our teams have helped to shut down several farms. We've actually brought a number of these dogs back. In fact, we brought some of them to San Francisco recently. Several of the farms were shut down, and we adopted a bunch of them out through the San Francisco SPCA and a number of other local societies. The use of animals in entertainment. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard, some of you have watched the documentary Blackfish. One documentary exposing SeaWorld's mistreatment of orcas, the history of capturing them from their pods in the wild, bringing them into captivity, high mortality rates, very shortened lifespans, and constant frustrations for animals that roam tens and tens of miles every day in the ocean. They live in family groups where they stay with their family members for a lifetime. There's one orca off of Puget Sound who is estimated to have turned 106 recently. I mean, these animals are incredible. They're the biggest predators in the world, and they're in a little tank at SeaWorld, like a big swimming pool. Be like you and me living in a closet for the rest of our lives, away from their family members, eternally frustrated, biting at the side of the pool, scraping their face, breaking their teeth. And occasionally some of the trainers get killed because they're so frustrated. They lash out, they get angry and upset just like we would if we were in a situation of deprivation, if we were in solitary confinement. What's amazing is so many kids and other people have responded. SeaWorld stock, after one documentary was aired, has gone down. It was up well above 40, now it's less than 20. And CNN kept replaying this documentary, and of course now people have access to things like YouTube and they can see this stuff. We're really closing the gap between what people want and what happens because we're giving people information. And Google and YouTube and others are part of that information revolution that's changing the way people are behaving because they have information they can act upon. These channels of information delivery are crucial to building a humane economy because the basis of it is an informed consumer who's making choices in the marketplace to reflect these sensibilities. And earlier this year, something happened that I didn't think was going to happen for another 10 or 20 years. Ringling Bros decided to give up its elephants and its circus acts. I mean, this is a company that infiltrated animal welfare groups, that spent tens of millions of dollars to defend its use of elephants, and they realized that its customers didn't want these elephants to be on chains 22 or 23 hours a day, shuttled in boxcars to 120 or 130 cities a year. The only time they get off the chains is when they walk from their miserable holding place to the arena where they're going to do a performance where they stand on their head, where a 180-pound person is giving a command to a 5-ton elephant. The The only reason they do that is because they're in fear, because they've been brutalized with a bull hook or other apparatuses or devices that cause them fear. In fact, the California legislature just yesterday passed a bill to ban the use of bull hooks statewide in a key committee. It's already passed one chamber. We hope it's soon to go to the governor to stop the use of these bull hooks, which are like a baseball bat with a sharp metal hook on the end. And that's how they dominate the elephants and get them to do what they want. Other circuses like International Circus, after Ringling made its announcement in March, also said it's giving up its elephants. So here's a cartoon where the elephant is just telling the SeaWorld orcas, hold on, relief is coming. There's no species that's had a bigger impact on the American culture than the horse. I mean, horses changed our notions of time and space. It allowed for westward expansion in the US, allowed for transport before the internal combustion engine. We owe horses a great debt of gratitude, yet we're shipping 150,000 horses a year from the US to slaughter plants in Mexico and Canada, which slaughter the horses and then ship them to Europe and Asia for human consumption. I mean, just a very poor way to pay back horses for all that they've done for us in our culture. We're working to stop that. And we've gotten the Europeans to suspend horse meat imports from Mexico, and we think that they may be doing it soon in Canada because these horses are coming off the racetrack, they're coming out of working facilities, they're dosed with all sorts of medicines that are forbidden for human consumption. It's amazing, the Europeans forbid US-produced chicken, pork, and beef from being imported into the EU because our American industrial farmers dose these animals with drugs that the Europeans consider to be unsafe, yet we've got 129 different drugs that are routinely used on horses that are not fit for human consumption here in the US. The Europeans we finally convinced them to better align their food safety policies for horses along with the other species that are consumed for human consumption. And there's also a tremendous love affair that we have with wildlife, especially elephants. And we love elephants, yet right now there's a terrible crisis going on with 35,000 elephants being killed a year, principally for their ivory, principally by militias and terrorist groups that are financing their terrorism by slaughtering elephants and selling the ivory. If you don't have a bank to rob, if you're out in a rural area, you can go slaughter elephants and translate ivory into cash and finance efforts to shoot up people at malls like the Westgate Mall in Nairobi, or go to a school as they did in Kenya and slaughter 70 or 80 students. The people doing the poaching are terrorists. It's not just a poor African who's trying to get by and killing an elephant. There is an incredible link that's well documented, and we're fighting this on the ground, but we're also fighting it in the US and China, which are the two largest markets for ivory. The reason that people are killing elephants is because consumers are placing value on the ivory. We've got to stop the trade in the ivory if we're going to stop the poaching in Africa. And in terms of the humane economy, I mean, African elephants are ecologically the keystone species throughout so much of Africa. I mean, you protect the elephants, you protect all the other animals, and the elephants have this incredible impact on the vegetative community. They can knock down trees, they can create savanna, but they are also economically the keystone species for Africa. Millions of people throughout the world go to African countries to see elephants and also rhinos and other great, remarkable species, prehistoric-looking creatures. It's billions of dollars. So there's been all sorts of economic analysis that a living elephant is 76 times more valuable than a dead elephant. I mean, the humane economy is about realizing what the true economic potential of animals is. And they're much more valuable alive than dead, as we discovered with whales. We now have a multi-billion-dollar whale watching industry that in comparative terms would have dwarfed what whaling was when it involved killing of whales. So that's the humane economy in progress. Now, even China has announced that it's going to end the ivory trade. This is a very, very hopeful sign. This announcement came just a few weeks ago. And there are other forms of exploitation of wildlife. The largest marine mammal slaughter in the world is the killing of harp and hooded seals on the Atlantic seaboard of Canada. Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, Labrador, and 400,000 seals were killed for their pelts, for fur. Not for local use. These are not tribal communities. These are folks who are going out, killing the seals on the ice floes, and then shipping the pelts all over the world. So we took this on in 2005, and the white is the quota that was set by the national wildlife and marine authorities. You know, they could kill 335,000, or they could kill 330,000, 400,000. The blue is the actual kill, because what we did is we started closing markets throughout the world. We got the European Union to ban imports of seal skins. We got Mexico to ban imports of seal skins. We've gotten China to restrict it. So now they have no reason to go kill the animals because the pelts are valueless. And this year was the smallest seal kill in a generation, precisely because of our work in the global economy. That millions of people are now aware of this, and they're saying they're not going to buy it, and politicians are saying, we don't want it. We don't want this cruelty to be associated with our commerce. And the use of animals in laboratories is a very significant issue. The United States has been the last nation in the world to allow chimpanzees to be used in invasive experiments. We did an undercover investigation at the largest chimp facility, which is in Louisiana, several years ago. And since that time, we've been campaigning to end the use of chimps in experiments. And we're basically to that point now where the head of NIH, which 2 years ago made an announcement with us that NIH is getting out of the business of using chimps in experiments, that they're going to ship out 400 of their government-owned chimps to sanctuaries over time and end the invasive experimentation on animals. So Dr. Heilig said pretty much everybody has gotten out or is getting out of research with chimps, because now we have sophisticated ways to test medicines. We've got sophisticated ways to test for toxicity without using a whole animal. We have organ on a chip, and we have computational tests, and we have all sorts of innovative ways that are cheaper, don't involve intense animal care, and we can find out more reliable things by doing experiments in these ways, or research in these ways. And then the Fish and Wildlife Service, Jane Goodall and I announced just at the end of June that all chimpanzees, whether they're captive or wild, they're going to be classed as endangered, which means that their use in film, in commercials, in the pet trade, as well as in biomedical research, is all going to be subject to very high levels of scrutiny now. So a big revolution in our relationship with chimps. And this issue of testing on animals, you know, for many, many decades, we've been testing mascaras and lipsticks and detergents and other household products and cosmetics on animals in labs. We force feed them, where there's a test called the lethal dose 50, where you provide so much of a substance that half of the control group, if it's 50 rabbits, 25 of them die from poisoning. Half of them, 50%, is the lethal dose. Or we do the Dre's eye irritancy test, where we dip chemicals in their eyes and cause, I mean, imagine we get a little soap on our eye and we try to rinse it out and scrub it. These animals have no way that they can get to their eye. They're in, you know, some sort of stockade, and we dump this concentrated product in their eye specifically to cause injury to them as a way of testing. Well, now we're down to just about 100,000 animals used in our country. We've got legislation in Congress called the Humane Cosmetics Act to end this once and for all. And we just got Europe to ban it in all 28 countries, and we last year got India to ban it. So 1.7 billion people in the global market now cannot even buy cosmetics tested on animals. This is going to change the way things are happening. India banned it, as I said, last year. And now all of these companies, as part of the growing humane economy, are saying no to animal testing, and they're marketing their products by saying we're not testing on animals. And this one here, Cody, you may have heard it in the news, They just bought a whole bunch of divisions of Procter & Gamble the other day for several $billion. They're already a non-animal testing company, and they bought P&G. So this is the progress of the humane economy. And fur, I mean, there's just no excuse to kill animals for their fur. We can make synthetic coats and natural fiber coats that are just as warm and just as stylish without causing animals to suffer in leg hold traps or on fur factories. There's just no point. And this week we announced with, or last week we announced with Hugo Boss, one of the major fashion companies, a luxury brand, that it is completely eliminating fur from its collections. We're negotiating with several other luxury brands now to get past this era of killing animals for their pelts. There's just no need. You can, many of these faux fur garments are so authentic looking that you cannot tell the difference. If you can't tell the difference, then why would you kill 20 or 30 or 40 animals to stitch together their fur? Now, all of these companies have made commitments on the fur issue. So you can see in all different sectors of the economy, corporations are now taking action. And the biggest area, as I mentioned, is the rearing of animals for food. We say that we love animals, yet we're eating 9 billion of them a year. And the conditions in which the vast majority of them are raised are so bad that it would and should turn the stomach of anyone with a conscience for other creatures. I mean, this is an image of an industrial pig facility with sows in gestation crates. This is the standard industry practice for the last 45 years to keep sows in place. They have them in a 2-foot by 7-foot cage where they can take one step forward and one step back. That's it. And they're there for 4 months, which is their gestation period. They're moved to another crate for just a short time. They're almost immediately re-impregnated, put back in this crate. So for 7, 8, 9, 10 successive pregnancies, they're immobilized. These are sociable herd animals that have a great nose that they use to root around in the ground, and they want to move around and they want to play like other animals. And they're living on a concrete slatted floor. It's slatted, and there's space in between so the manure and the urine can fall into a lagoon beneath them. And all that ammonia then comes up as water evaporates. And they can't move. I mean, so I don't care if you're a vegan or vegetarian or an inveterate carnivore, there's a problem with this. I mean, wherever you are in terms of your own dietary preferences, this must stop. And we're working to stop it. This is unfortunately the attitude of the major trade association with the industry. A guy said, in response to our campaign to end the use of the crates, he said, so our animals can't even turn around for 2.5 years. I don't know who asked a sow if she wanted to turn around. I mean, you can look at these comments and you can look back at our history and see how men denied women the right to vote and said, oh, well, they shouldn't be able to vote. They shouldn't be making policy decisions. The same country that had chattel slavery and said that, a whole race or group of people should be, conscripted into forced labor. I mean, we've done some really unpleasant things in our society, but we've always, as a society, overcome these problems through reason and science and logic and reliance on our founding principles in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of justice and equality. I mean, you cannot have terrible injustice to people and look back upon our founding documents and say that's consistent. Well, I don't think we can say that we're an anti-cruelty society and tolerate this sort of behavior. We've got to conform our behavior with our values and our principles. There must be a realignment. And it should be happening in agriculture as well. And it is. These are all companies that my colleague Josh Balk has negotiated with, and his colleagues in our farm animal department negotiated agreements with all these companies to phase out the purchase of pork from operations like the one you saw that confined the sows in those crates. This has just happened in the last 3 or 4 years when McDonald's, we announced in a joint release with McDonald's in February or January 2012 that they were going to phase out the purchase of pork from operations. And all these companies, with the exception of a couple who preceded it, like Whole Foods. This is a major revolution, and we've got to continue to propel it. And the other area is the treatment of the hens used for eggs. You know, these hens are kept in battery cages. They're small wire cages where 6 or 8 birds are kept in a cage for their entire life, 12 or 18 months. And the amount of space that the bird has is 67 square inches of space under the industry voluntary standard. Now, there are a bunch of egg production companies that keep birds in 48 or 54-inch allotments. But again, their standard, their high standard is 67 square inches. Well, this is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. 8.5 times 11 is what? 93. So 67 square inches is 2/3 the size of this sheet of paper. This is the living space that the hen has for the 18 months that she's alive. And she's in there with 6 or 7 other birds. So imagine if 7 or 8 of us were in a small elevator and we never got out. I mean, if we were in there for 10 or 15 minutes, if that elevator gets stuck and we're jammed in there, you better believe most of us are going to go crazy. Imagine if you're there for a day or for a month or for a year. This is what we're doing. Animals raised for food. I mean, if you came, you know, from another planet and saw what we were doing to these animals, you'd say, my God, this is incredible. We keep them as pets and we treat them as family members, yet we're doing this to them for food production? So California was the state that really started this. Some of you who've been in this state for a while may remember this. We did a ballot measure in 2008 called Proposition 2, and this is the vote result for Prop 2. The green, there are 58 counties in California. The green shaded counties favored Prop 2, and the red shaded counties opposed it. But overall, it got 63.5% of the vote to stop extreme confinement of laying hens, breeding sows, and veal calves. Got more votes than any other initiative in American history for farm animals. So the public is waking up, and I'm sure if you voted in that election, this was Obama's first election, the presidential election was on the same ballot, you probably voted yes on this ballot measure because it made sense. Animals built to move should be allowed to move. Even animals raised for food deserve humane treatment. And Prop 2 took effect January 1st. It had a 6-year phase-in because it was so moderate, it allowed the farmers 6 years to transition to more humane systems. Finally took effect this year. And now we've worked with all of these companies. Really, Josh has in the last 6 months, most of them have made announcements to buy only cage-free eggs. Starbucks has made a pledge, Burger King, we just announced Kellogg's and General Mills, Hilton Hotels, huge food service companies like Compass Group and Aramark and Sodexo. A big corporate revolution is happening on this front. And if you shop at Whole Foods, you'll see that Whole Foods is providing more information to consumers about animal products than any other company. It's using a program called the Global Animal Partnership. You can see it here. And they certify products on 1 to 5 plus. So if you look for chicken or turkey, you can get level 1, step 3, step 5 product if they've got it in. And each of these levels conforms to a strict set of animal welfare standards. So 1 is a more humane standard, but it goes higher levels as the numbers go higher. So 5 is the most humane. And this is giving consumers more information. We're hoping that the other big food retailers adopt this system. It's not owned by Whole Foods. Whole Foods had a role in developing it. But this is a potential revolution in the market. And of course, the other revolution, this, by the way, Whole Foods, which is now a $16 billion company, now is the principal Gap selling company. I mean, products from Gap. And already it's had an effect on, I mean, each year, 290 million animals, 2,600 farms. So you can see the power of corporations. When they make a decision, it really ripples out and has a big effect. And, you know, in the broader sense, though, there's no way we can continue to eat as much meat as we're doing in our society. We're eating too much. We have basically the highest per capita meat consumption in the world, and it's not sustainable. And Bill Gates, on his Facebook page, was talking about this issue, and he said, by 2030, the world will need millions of tons more meat than it does today. But meeting that demand with animal products isn't sustainable. The meat market is ripe for reinvention, because when you think about it, Francis Moore Lepay wrote about this 40 years ago in Diet for a Small Planet. Animals are protein factories in reverse. We take a lot of plant matter, put it into the bodies of animals, and they convert it into a small amount of animal protein. And the ratios are 10 or 12 or 13 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of beef, 7 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of pork, 3 or 4 pounds to produce 1 pound of chicken. There's tremendous waste and loss. I mean, the animals are emitting heat, they're keeping their organs going, they're defecating. There's all this energy loss. If we ate more plants directly, we would much more efficiently use the foodstuffs in the world. And of course, then there's the water issue. I mean, you could float a battleship on what a cow needs in terms of his or her water needs, because they're emitting heat, the body has needs for water, and they're urinating a lot of it out as well. So the west of the 20-inch rain line in the United States, I mean, irrigation is a big thing. And I don't need to tell you in California what you're going through on the water issue. There are companies that are now developing plant-based proteins that replicate the taste and texture of meat and provide equal or typically superior nutritional content. As much or more protein, more in the way of nutrients, without the fat, cholesterol, hormones, other chemicals that are now into the systems of these animals. This is one company called Beyond Meat. You can see its logo on the upper right-hand side. The future of meat is meatless, just as tasty. So why shouldn't? I mean, if you can, just like fur, if you can replicate the look of fur, the style of it, the quality, why do you need to kill the animals? If you can develop plant-based proteins that duplicate it with much less in the way of resource use and no animal cruelty, it seems to me a very logical argument for us. And the company that Josh started in its latest round raised $90 million. I think they had $150 million in offers for their Series C investment round. Fastest growing food company in the world ever. The biggest companies, Walmart, Sodexo, Compass Group, all want this product because not only is it better in terms of nutrition and equivalent in taste, it's cheaper. It makes sense. I mean, if you're putting all that energy into animals who inefficiently convert it to the product where you could just use the plants, the energetics are obviously in favor of the more efficient use, and that should be reflected in cost. That's what's going on. So that's why there's a real revolution that's going on right now. And these are some of our different campaigns: stopping extreme confinement, ending puppy mills, dealing with horse slaughter, protecting marine mammals, having anti-cruelty laws throughout the world, ending the era of cosmetic and toxicity testing on animals, and much more. So we'd love for you guys to get involved. We're at humanesociety.org. We'd love for you to become a member. We'd love for you to sign up as a monthly donor. But most important, we want you to get involved because it's consumer activism that's driving the humane economy. So thanks for listening to my discourse, and appreciate your being here today. Happy to take any questions.
So the slide that you showed with Ivory had some like figurines, that sort of thing. I'm wondering what uses of ivory there are in the U.S. that it's a big import for us.
Yeah, the ivory is used for a variety of purposes. It used to be widely used with pianos and other musical instruments, but Steinway and now Yamaha don't use ivory. And it's mainly in trinkets, little carved decorative items. And China is the #1 consumer in the U.S. and the #2 consumer. China's #1 consumer, and the U.S. is the second largest consumer. We're supporting a ballot initiative which is actually being financed principally by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, this November in Washington State, to ban any sale of ivory as well as the parts of 9 other endangered animals. We have a bill in California to ban the ivory trade here. It's already through one chamber. It's looking very positive. And we're working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a national rule on the issue. But there is kickback from folks who are in the antiques business, music industry, as well as the NRA, because they want to shoot elephants, or they want their members to be able to shoot elephants and import the ivory into the U.S. So if you go to our website and then you go to our state page, you can find information on the bill here in California. You can write to your lawmakers and get this done. And then we want Governor Brown to sign this bill later in the year. Very important. California is the biggest market with New York, and we did pass a bill last year in New York to stop the trade in ivory there.
So it's mainly trinkets?
Trinkets, yep. To think of these beautiful, huge elephants being killed as trinkets there's something ironic about that.
Why there isn't, or maybe there isn't, I'm not aware of it, lobbying for controlling the breeding of dogs, like breeders registry, breeder control, breeding only on demand, like there's many aspects of it, and also health issues that, from interbreeding and unhealthy dogs and so on and so forth. It creates a lot of these rescue animals eventually, too.
Yeah. You would think economically there should be a cost borne by people who are breeding because they are contributing to a population problem that the rest of society is dealing with. I mean, it's the reason you have Santa Clara County Animal Care and Control spending millions of dollars while you have private humane organizations caring for all these animals. If you add up the costs, it's a couple of $1 billion a year in our society. But right now, we treat everyone with essentially no tax on this behavior. There have been attempts to have a fee for breeding, but it's been resisted. There's still in our country, this great tension we have between liberty and justice. And I think that, there are folks who say, I'm responsible, I'm doing it right, I shouldn't be penalized. And that has been a difficult thing to overcome in state legislatures. I think what we're trying to do is normalize the discussion about spaying and neutering and about adoption. And we're trying to attack with our Shelter Pet Project advertising campaign, which is a national advertising campaign, the stigma associated with animal shelter animals. That they're not problem animals. It's usually a human problem that resulted in the animal being relinquished. Someone got divorced, they moved, they went to an apartment that wouldn't allow animals. It's not the animal's fault. The animal's not defective. So there's this notion somehow that, well, the breeder's animals are better. Get one of these puppy mill dogs, as we do all the time, because we raid them. They're sick, they're inbred, there are all sorts of problems. The mixed breed animals are actually much healthier because they have a much richer genetic diversity. And it means they've got fewer of these chronic and hereditary problems that plague certain breeds, like bulldogs. They have this pushed-in face, they can't breathe very well. Dachshunds have this elongated back and they have back trouble. German Shepherds have hip problems. Almost all of the breeds have a laundry list of problems. So when you get more diversity and you mix the breeds, they have many fewer health problems. Some of the large breed dogs, they can't live past 7 or 8 years. I mean, these are our creations of selective breeding, and there are lots of physical problems that are borne by the consumer in terms of higher veterinary costs, as well as the emotional pain of having to see your animal suffering or dying prematurely.
It's more has to do with marketing. I found out that, you're right, but a lot of people still want purebred. So what I found out is that people are not aware that you can get a purebred in rescue, and there's many, many purebred rescues, and they have this notion that all dogs in rescue are mixed dogs, that's mainly pit bulls and so on, and they never go to even find, they don't know. They just don't know. They go and pay $2,000 for a purebred dog, and they don't know they could have got one, from a rescue.
It's one of the many reasons why I want you to read my new book coming out, because petfinder.com is part of this humane revolution. Petfinder.com loads pictures and information about available dogs and cats, homeless dogs and cats. You can get any kind of dog that you want by searching the website. If you go to a physical brick and mortar shelter, you may not find the animal you want, even though 1/3 of them are purebreds in shelters. But now you can find, when the President Obama wanted a Portuguese water dog, He could have gone to Pet Finder and found a Portuguese water dog. You don't need to go to a breeder. You can get any kind of dog that you want through this channel. So you're right.
Speaking of pit bulls, I'm wondering if you could speak to any work that's being done about changing their very unfortunate and undeserved reputation in shelters.
Well, pit bulls are really not even a breed. We call them pit bull type dogs. There are different kinds of dogs, American Staffordshire Terrier and others. And they definitely have been the victims of stigma. If you look back historically in our culture, there were different dogs who were viewed as the most menacing and aggressive over time. In the post-slavery era, bloodhounds were viewed as the most vicious dogs. You can see pictures of them and their depictions in popular culture and in art. They were the vicious ones. They were chasing slaves and trying to get them back. When I was a kid, it was Doberman Pinschers. There was also, before that, it was German Shepherds. There was a real craze with Rottweilers for a while. So pit bulls have been kind of dominant as the badass dog for the last 20 or 25 years. And some of it really, I went to a fascinating lecture from a guy who works at the Canine Research Center. And you can see these popular media caricatures of the dogs that have really driven this phony impression of them. And I don't know if any of you remember, the Little Rascals, but Petey the dog, was a pit bull type dog. I mean, they were the great American dog at one point. There is a circumstance where some people who are not well behaved themselves get these dogs, and then they color the behavior of the dogs, and it's because of that sort of morphing of the dog based on human behavior that this reputation develops. They are the most commonly used dogs in fighting rings, but they were specifically bred and trained not to attack the people because they're in with their handlers when they're fighting, and they were bred and trained to attack other dogs, but not to attack people. So there are lots of convoluted parts of this. The chairman of our board is a big pit bull enthusiast, and he sleeps with 3 in his bed every night. And we have a dogs in the office policy at the Humane Society. I know you do at Google as well, which is fantastic. We wrote a book about this dogs in the office and invoked Google's own policy. And the dogs are so well behaved, and it's just a question of properly raising them.
I wanted to ask you specifically about an issue happening right now around the New York Blood Center. I know you wrote a letter to the New York Blood Center a few months ago, and for those of you who don't know, maybe you can speak to it more eloquently than I, but there was a chimpanzee colony in Liberia that's been used for biomedical research by the New York Blood Center for decades, and the New York Blood Center has recently essentially abandoned them and ceased all funding for their care. So what can people, the specific question I have is, what can people like myself do to encourage nonprofit organizations or corporations that have hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to do the moral thing and meet their commitments?
Well, you articulated it very well. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for following it. I mean, this is a case of someone creating a problem and then passing the cost on to someone else. So after the New York Blood Center, which is a large charity, a public health-oriented charity that obviously does blood-oriented work, important work, they had used chimps in research, stopped using them, had this colony of them in Liberia, was supporting them to maintain their health and well-being, as they had pledged to do a number of years ago. Because again, if you use a chimpanzee, this is what happens in film as well, or commercials. You see these cute infant or juvenile chimpanzees. When they get to be 7 or 8 years old, they become too powerful to maintain. They can't be used on set. They live for 60 years, so they dump them onto us and other animal welfare groups and chimp protector groups. We have to care for them for another 50 years. Talking about it costs on average $17,000 to care for a chimp every year. Look at that times 50 years, it's approaching $1 million. So where does responsibility come in? It kind of goes to your question. I mean, people create the problem and they dump it on the rest of us. We need a fuller accounting of what's going on in our society. We need a fuller accounting of factory farming. I mean, we think of this cheap meat where we have all these public health costs that are transferred to society in terms of heart disease and obesity. We have public health risks in terms of antibiotic-resistant bacteria because we're dosing these animals with antibiotics. They're dumping their manure in our streams and our lakes, and they're poisoning fish and diminishing the recreational qualities of these water areas. I mean, on and on and on. So the New York Blood Center as a charity just completely dropped the ball. And we're picking up the slack, but we shouldn't have to. I'd say, keep tabs on our website. We're urging people to write to the Blood Center, to hold them accountable. And I can assure you that we're not going to let them get away with it. We're going to stick with the plan. Thank you.
I had a question about how you guys are working with veterinarians, specifically for lab animal veterinarians and also food animal vets.
Well, we have a division called the Humane Society Veterinary Medical Association. So we have about 7,000 vets, or about 70 to 80,000 vets in the U.S. Most of them are small animal vets, but there are categories of them. There are farm animal vets, lab animal vets, equine vets. And we're trying to get vets in a bigger leadership position on animal protection. Most vets historically worked for the industries that were causing harm to animals, and they then internalized and then externalized their value system. And they were part of the problem. Now with women now dominating veterinary school slots, it used to be 90-10 male to female in vet schools. Now it's 90-10 females. And with small animal vets caring for pets not associated with these industries, there's a big revolution happening in the vet field. We want to encourage it, and that's why we've got the Humane Society Veterinary Medical Association working. So thank you all very much. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for taking time from your work day. Appreciate it. Thank you.